This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pm-podcast.com or send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 158. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast. Nice to have you with us. How would you feel if you only had 140 characters, just like on Twitter, to give a status report to each of your project stakeholders? Well, at first I bet you'd probably complain that 140 characters isn't enough, and then you'd put a lot of effort into customizing these 140 characters that you have to the person receiving it, making it absolutely perfect for your recipient. Your internal sponsor would receive a different tweet than your external customer, and the message would look even different for your project oversight committee chair. Don't worry, we aren't going to ask you to use Twitter on your projects. In fact, my interview with Mark Phillips, who is the lead evangelist of Vertibase, only briefly mentions Twitter, and then we discuss why and how you should both customize and contextualize all your project communications. We look at the role that we project managers play in this, what skills we need in order to be able to do that, and what you can do to improve the contextualization of your project communications starting tomorrow. Well, next I have a correction to make. After the Gizmos interview with Jason Westland about projectmanager.com, that was in episode 154, I announced that we were going to give away 2 licenses of that web-based tool, projectmanager.com. Well, it turns out that I misunderstood. The 2 licenses aren't for the online tool, but instead they are for their project management methodology, which is called MPMM. So, therefore, our winners, Sandy Koppelman and Oke Abiodun, will receive a license to MPMM in the coming days. Sorry about the mix-up. In the past few episodes, you also heard me announce that the sponsor of this episode is the PM Summit 2010 in Munich. This was a completely free sponsorship that I offered to the PMI Munich chapter to help promote their event here through the podcast. They are still the sponsor, but today, instead of a sponsor message, let's speak to Stephen Norton and learn a bit more about the event. Hello, Stephen, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you.
You are a member of the marketing team of the Munich PM Summit 2010. Is this the first year that this summit is held?
Yes, that is correct.
And what is the topic of the summit?
The central theme of the summit is the clever achievement of milestones.
Okay, what exactly does that mean?
We believe that it is clever to ensure project management success in industry practice through the smart implementation of methods and the intelligent application of tools.
Okay, so who should be attending this summit?
The conference is aimed at project managers from every industry and every form of project. Novices who are maybe just gaining their first experience in the introduction or implementation of project management in their company are also welcome.
And who are some of the presenters and what will the attendees learn?
The keynote speaker is Mr. Peter Taylor, Project Management Office Director of Siemens Industry Software in the United Kingdom. He will give attendees useful insight into his experience of managing large software projects. We also have a further 35 presentations, which we have grouped into 8 tracks. These tracks range from the synergies of agile and classical project management methods to pragmatic project management for small and medium-sized enterprises. Small and medium-sized enterprises play a central role in the European economy. They are an important source of business competence, innovation, and employment. I will pose 3 questions. Are established project management methods usable and affordable for SMEs? What are the benefits of investing in project management for SMEs? And should we concentrate on modifying specifically slimming down these methods. We believe that SMEs need pragmatic solutions. Sophisticated methods and voluminous standards are generally difficult to roll out. One driving factor is the cost efficiency. Delegates attending the PM Summit will be able to hear answers to these questions and learn from the experiences of our speakers.
Talking about learning from the experiences of our speakers, when I think about projects, every project has a crisis. It's a common experience for us project managers. What advice will the PM Summit offer in regards to project crises?
Without sound evaluation of the situation, a project manager cannot start to reorganize the project. Several questions need to be addressed. How does the project manager find out what is going wrong? How suitable are the project tools for managing a crisis? Is a 360-degree review an effective method to bring a project back on track? How does one recreate a high-performing team after the crisis? The PM Summit will provide delegates with examples of restructuring, particularly in startups, and give advice on how to reorganize a project successfully.
Many of our listeners are PMPs and PGMPs, so how many PDUs can they earn by attending the summit?
By attending the PM Summit, delegates will earn up to 10 PDUs.
Very nice. When and where is the PM Summit going to take place?
The PM Summit will be held on Monday, the 15th of November 2010 at the Hilton Munich Park Hotel, located in Munich's famous English Garden.
Oh, wonderful. Well then, finally, where on the internet can people go to learn more about the summit?
For details about the PM Summit, please go to www.pm-summit.de and click on the Union flag for the English version.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having been here and introduced us to the PM Summit. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Cornelius.
On to today's interview with Mark Phillips, product manager and lead spokesperson for Vertibase. He spends a lot of time traveling, talking to customers, user groups, and conferences in the US and Canada, primarily about project management, time management, and getting more done. He writes about those same topics on his blog and other places, including a regular column for Fusion Authority. His work has also been published in publications like CNET, Computer World, and the Financial Times. Before getting into project management and software, Mark worked on Wall Street as an economic and financial analyst. And now, take out a piece of paper, write down, I'm a project manager and I communicate 90% of the time, and enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Mark Phillips, lead evangelist of Vertibase.
Hello, Mark, and welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Thank you. Hello, Cornelius.
You recently wrote an article which is called Context Trumps Content, and it starts out by looking at Twitter, of all things. Why?
Twitter, for many years, I'd kind of spoken about the need for good project communication and how people need to customize their communications for particular situations. And it's a very conceptual notion to speak to. It's particular to people who are either in the thick of a project or who are new to project management. But then along came this incredible service called Twitter, which is specifically context-specific communications. and it swept the world. The rapid growth of Twitter, which captured the popular imagination and is really just growing tremendously, became the perfect example of communications in context. So I thought let's grab the moment, let's use this as an example and draw the lessons out from it, since it's something that people are increasingly familiar with.
Okay, but just to be on the safe side, the interview is not about Twitter, you're just using it as an example, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so let's take these initial thoughts that you have given us here and go over into project management with them. You called it context customization. What do you mean by context customization?
In any communication, what ultimately matters is what the listener gets out of the communication. It's not what comes out of your mouth, what you put down on the email, what you put on the piece of paper or in the project plan. It's what did the recipient of that communication get out of it. And this very much depends upon the context of that listener's role in a project and what they need to know. And that should frame the context of the communication itself. And each communication and each player in a project has a different role and a different context that information needs to fall into. So what I mean by context customization is that the context of any communication has to be customized for the listener and the circumstance.
Mm-hmm. And what role does a project manager play in this? You talked about players. So what type of player is the project manager?
Well, of course, he's the ultimate good guy and facilitator among the whole thing. So a project manager, in the ideal, needs to be a good listener, needs to be a good communicator, foster an environment of good and effective communication, and ultimately has to understand the context that each communication has to be delivered in, so that information can be effectively transmitted back and forth among the different people on a project.
Okay, then let's take this to the next steps. How do we ensure that the right, the correct communication, the correct context is communicated with each and every project stakeholder? How do we get there?
First step is really more of I would say, an introspective step. The project manager has to see themselves as a facilitator. There has to be a bit of judo involved here, where it's a matter of making sure all the parts are moving smoothly and using the parts' own inertia in a positive way. So the first step for a project manager is to see themselves as a facilitator in this process, who has a unique set of skills that they can bring to make sure that the process and the communication is moving effectively. The next step in that is, once you can have that little bit of self-effacement as a project manager, is really to understand the role that each person plays in a project. And just to put in big bucket categories, a project sponsor or a client on the project, whether that be an internal or external client, needs and requires very different information than your project team, than the people who would be actually executing that project. And even among the project team, there might be people in different phases of that project or who are executing different parts of it, and they need different communications. And then, of course, you as the project manager also require information in a very different way, so that you can have the information that you need to, first of all, be the mediator between the two, as well as then to be able to apply the skills and techniques of a project manager to make things move forward effectively.
Have you seen any projects as an example or anything like that where this was done well?
I think when you look at any well-functioning corporation or organization that makes a change from a particular way of doing things to a new way of doing things, you can see good communications at work. One example that I like to draw on, just because I'm here in Detroit, in the Motor City, as it were, when Alan Mulally came in as the manager, as the new CEO of Ford Motor Company, one of the first things that people started writing about was the change in the meetings that he held, and how he now started to incorporate more performance metrics and more measurable indicators in his presentations. Now, on one side, there were a lot of management gurus saying, yeah, this is the importance of these kind of indicators, and for sure that's true. But the way I looked at it and the way I saw it was, here was a person who was able to get the information they needed in the right context and put it in the right context and in the right language to then speak to other executives or other managers so that they could actually act upon that data, so that Mr. Mullally's vision was communicated effectively to them, and then that information then could then be passed down to the different teams, which could start to act on that information, on the plan, to make it a reality. So that, in terms of the corporate world, that's one of the examples that I like to draw on. In terms of just project management tool set that I like to explain to people, it's a project manager who might be familiar, let's say, just with a Gantt chart or with a project plan in various different templates or tools. The information in a concrete level that you're going to give to a project sponsor or to a client is going to be much more milestone based. And the information you're going to convey to them is, are you on schedule, on budget, and how's the scope doing? But that then, you're not going to give that information over to the people who are on the project team. The people on the team need to know specifically the tasks, the work packages that they need to be working on and the tasks that they need to be executing to moving the project forward. One of the critical mistakes I think that project managers often make is they want to either convey the nitty-gritty to the client or the sponsor, or on the other hand, they want to convey the big picture to the people on the team. And these are, in a very real sense, I think, when the team members hear this kind of information, they either go blank and zone out and tune out, or there's a feeling that there is more information that needs to be conveyed to them, but the project manager doesn't know how to convey it, so they're trying to convey to us the big picture so that we can make decisions on how it should go, which is not the role of someone as a team member. Or they might do so and take the initiative, but then that off spec or out of scope, as it were. And similarly, when that level of detail is given to the project sponsor or the client, I think in a very real sense, the client feels that that the project manager is kind of asking them to do their job, to do the project manager job, because the details are really the realm of the project manager and the team, and not the realm of the client.
Mm-hmm. Let's take what you have just said and let's take a look at how this translates over into the trenches. In particular, how you translate this into the trenches, because you are the lead evangelist of Verdibase. It's an online project management software. And of course, I now have to ask you this. How does your tool help with this kind of targeted, contextualized communication?
Thank you for asking. We do it by focusing on structure, that the information that is conveyed via Verdibase, via the project management software, is information in context. So if something is impacting a date, there is specifically a place where you will see the impact when the team member checks that off, puts in that comment or that kind of request for a change in the date, where that will then trickle back up specifically into the schedule, and then it would impact then the due date of the project itself. But by keeping the information in context and giving people specific places to put that information, it's only asking the team members for information that's relevant, to not go crazy on the information. Only information that's relevant on the project is defined by the project manager or by the client, and then have that roll up into displays in ways that are meaningful to each one of the stakeholders. If I may, just to contrast this, and this is also one of the points in the article, is there are a whole range of tools that have come out in the market over the last 5 to 10 years, which are really built on increasing the amount of content that's generated in general, but also specifically on a project. If you look at a lot of the project collaboration and project management tools that are out there, and even some of the trends right now and what people are calling project management 2.0 or 3.0, It's to generate a tremendous amount of content and information around the project. Now, in being project manager for many years and in speaking to other project managers, while they appreciate the amount of input and feedback that some people choose to then give on a project, they are bogged down by the amount of time that it takes to sift through all of that content that's generated on a project to get to information that's actually relevant to schedule, budget, scope, performance, all of those kind of things. So while you see that people contribute and will talk a lot about projects, a lot of that information is out of context and can often slow down truly the effective flow of information, and therefore the really slow down relevant business intelligence and strategic decision making on a project.
Mm-hmm. Allow me to challenge you here at this point, because frankly, all of this, it seems like common sense on project management, things that we have been taught all along. Focus on your communication partner and give them what they need to know. Do you see these rules being violated then in the trenches all the time?
All the time.
Okay, and why do you think that is?
I think people like to talk.
Okay, yes, guilty as charged.
So I think people like to talk, or you have people that don't like to talk and don't communicate. Depends on which side of the fence you are. I think many project managers can be caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of often having to make decisions on the scope or on the requirements that weren't fleshed out in the beginning. That in an ideal situation, those decisions would have been made by the client or the project sponsor. So in lieu of that, they have a vision for what the project needs to look like at the end. So since there wasn't a formal requirements gathering, or the scope wasn't properly fleshed out to start with, they have to kind of ad lib it, as it were, along the way. So I think project managers try to do that very often will try to do that by conveying the vision that they have of the project and how they see it fitting into the overall organization or the goals of the phase or of the portfolio that this project is a part of. And they want to give that vision to the team members so that they themselves can start to make some of the decisions, or at least that the decisions that the team members will make when executing the project will be informed by this overall vision. And ultimately, though, that's just trying to make up for that lack of proper requirements gathering or scope in the first place. And then in terms of communications to the client, I think that again, because of this uncertainty that's created by not having everything spelled out as clearly as it ideally could be, they want to convey a level of detail on what's happening on the project, so that in hopes that the client will somehow realize how that impacts the schedule, the budget, the scope, the overall performance of the project itself. There is rarely a central reference point that people can talk to help translate through. In one of our blog posts about a year or so ago, I used a concept called a boundary object. In anthropology, there is a concept of a boundary object, which is something that whose meaning spans two different disparate groups, but there's enough commonality between the definitions that people will know what they're talking about, that each group can communicate to the other using this boundary object. So one of the things that I talk about in project management a lot is using the schedule as this boundary object. But using the schedule, you have to have different views on that schedule so that you can have effective communications with each one of the different people on the project. So, for example, again, the schedule to the client or the sponsor, you're going to show it at a milestone level, or maybe even at a phase level, or depending upon the size of the organization, in a portfolio level. So you want to have that schedule be able to roll up into a very high level to speak to that audience. And on the other side, you need to have that schedule be able to expand and drill down to an individual task list or a set of work packages that a department needs to deliver so that you can communicate to the team members and the people doing the work. And then as a project manager, you want to be able to have that all together in one place. And you ultimately would want some tool or template that has that kind of roll up so that seamlessly you can facilitate that kind of communication. So in this sense, that the schedule becomes that boundary object. Now, what happens when the effective communication, or as you called it, the project communication common sense, gets violated? You could really trace it back to the strength or weakness of that schedule, as it were, as a boundary object. And by the schedule, I do mean it in the strict sense as being an output from a whole scope gathering and requirements gathering process, in a very formal way. So it does encapsulate kind of the project goals and scope and work packages.
Okay, here's my final question for you. Not everybody is using your tool, Vertibase, in their offices. So how about those project managers who don't have it? What can they do tomorrow? They're heading back into their offices. They know they have to communicate about 90% of the time. So what can they do to improve communications, to make their communications more contextualized?
I'm going to pull it back to Twitter here.
Okay, we started there. Let's go back, yes?
Sure, and this is kind of what I call the Twitter rule of project management, which is ask yourself before you send that email or before you do that meeting or before you speak, is what's going to come out of my mouth something that this listener would subscribe to? Would they subscribe to my tweet? In Twitter, it's very easy to unilaterally decide who you're going to listen to and who you're not going to listen to. So what happens is people decide they want to listen to Oprah. So they'll sign up to Oprah's tweet stream. So Oprah doesn't even have to know whether they're signing up or not. They can just decide who they want to tune into. And let's say they don't want to tune into their boss's tweet stream because it's totally irrelevant to them. So people have that ability to personalize the information that's coming into them. So I would tell people, project managers, a piece of advice is whether they have a follow or not or unfollow button on their face or on your face, they do in their heads. Everyone you're talking to has that button in their heads, whether they're going to really pay attention to what you're saying or not. So make sure that what's coming out of your mouth is something that they will listen to and they would follow and subscribe to that tweet, as it were.
Okay, Mark, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Cornelius.
And that was our interview with Mark Phillips on how to customize and contextualize your project communications. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the PM Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching over 38 hours of video training from pmprepcast.com. Works for the CAPM exam too, by the way. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. The more time you spend in reporting on what you are doing, the less time you have to do anything. Stability is achieved when you spend all your time doing nothing, but reporting on the nothing you are doing. Until next time.